The video you're watching right now is for signal or emergency flares. It will cover, by definition, information concerning firearms, and ammunition reloading will be discussed very briefly. The purpose of this video is not to reload ammunition that can be used to hunt or harm someone or for self-defense. It is for making flare cartridges or reloading them. Quick answer if you're curious. In the United States, we have several different flare cartridge standards, but one of the most common ones is a modification to a 12-gauge shotgun shell, where it's made to where it only is a 2-inch limited shell per chamber. That's because the flare launcher is an all-plastic shotgun pistol that has a 2-inch limit on it, so it would be less likely for you to put the wrong kind of shell in. It's only to make sure you won't blow yourself up with a real cartridge. Now, in that case, the device we're talking about for the flare gun is made out of plastic and is reloadable, but only in name. The U.S. Coast Guard and other authorities do not want you reloading these because it's a safety device. It's a dumb idea. However, this might be something you want to know about. Now, in order to make this technically possible, I've looked up various methods for doing it. Now, I'm going to tell you, to get to the point, the best option. In the European Union and in Russia, they have something called a hunter's signal. Now, that is the one in the middle, and it's called a 15 millimeter signal or flare cartridge. And it's essentially a metal container that goes to a screw device here. And what you do is you put inside of it, reloadable or replacement projectiles that are approximately 0.57 or 14.5 millimeters across approximately. They're projected into the air as much as several hundred feet by a shotgun primer put at this end. This entire container here is essentially, well, an aluminum pseudo barrel for launching them. Now, the thing about it is that the outer diameter for these things ranges from 16.6 millimeter to 16.74 or 0.66 inches in outer diameter. Now, the launcher for it, unfortunately, even though it's preferred in the European Union and in Russia, is very close, if not identical, to the shape and size of something in the United States that we're not really supposed to have access to, and that is a pen gun. It's a pen launcher. It's not supposed to launch or fire firearms cartridges, but unfortunately it's incredibly easy to convert, and it may be difficult to find in the United States. Now, the easier to replace and easier to find shotgun primers going into it being centerfire negates that problem, and that's why you may be able to find those more easily. So if you have a pen launcher and an empty one of these, you can just push out the primer, put a new one in it, and then buy these for 50 cents to $2 a pop, literally, and put them in, and you can use them. And you can even leave it permanently mounted on, well, semi-permanently, obviously you'll have to, put on the primer, but you can buy a box of primers very cheap, $4 for 50 or something like that, or 100, excuse me. And you can buy these reloadables for $20 for 10 of them or $5 for 10 of them. It depends on where you're buying them from. Now, the projectiles themselves have a physical length of almost 2 inches. Coincidentally, that's almost exactly the length that would be considered about right for use in one of the flare gun cartridges. Flare gun cartridges in the United States are based on 12-gauge shotgun shells and are all plastic, are 3 inches long, and this would fit just fine and would use the same shotgun primer. So we do immediately have this following statement to make here I'm going to make on my channel. If you want to reload the European Union or Russian hunters signals, that's what they're for. Honestly, that's what you should do. And they also come in plastic as well as metal. I'd recommend the metal one for durability. And as far as reloading something like this into a shotgun shell, they make an adapter for it. So all you have to do is buy one of these, and then the little screw-on doohickey so you can put it into a 12-gauge or any gauge, actually, that it can cram into, and you can launch these cartridges. Now we're going to go into the weird range of 20-gauge. If you're not aware of it, 20-gauge shotgun shells exist, and so do 20-gauge shotguns. They're also the kind that will jam fit into the bore of a 12-gauge. The outer diameter of the cartridge being smaller than the 0.725 or 0.729 inch diameter on the inside of a 12-gauge. Now, this got me thinking a long time ago, and I actually did experiments with this but didn't do a video about it. What if you could take a piece of metal tubing that would fit just the same size and shape as a flare gun cartridge and make it. Well, because of the bore versus the diameter of the flare cartridges are made to where they'll jam in the bore too, which means in essence you can make a big, long 20 gauge cartridge out of some metal or plastic tubing and be able to use it in 12 gauge and 20 gauge to launch flares, as long as the inner diameter matched this, which is again 0.57 or 14.5 millimeters, 0.57 inches. Now, EMT, electrical mechanical tubing, which is steel, that is made for running electrical wire through, which has no seams in it, the half-inch variety, called 16 millimeter, happens to have an inner diameter of 0.622 and an outer diameter of 0.706. So its outer diameter will fit in here and work just fine for firing a flare. And you could use this washer here. I'll have a link to an example on Amazon if you care. Would work as a rim for it. And it would need a plug in here approximately 0.24, or about a 1/4 inch thick, that would be drilled out to take a shotgun primer. And yeah, this would work just fine. You would have to jam fit it into your EMT tubing and then somehow mount your washer on. I would recommend drilling 3 holes and putting little screws into it. I might even include an image of one that I'm going to build later, but the point is, that would be a method for you to completely from scratch make a 20 gauge shotgun shell, obviously. But more importantly, making it a starting point for a flare launcher. Again, the inner diameter of the EMT tubing is 0.622 inches. Now that does come close to or match a 20 gauge shotgun shell. It's so close that we're just going to call it that. Now that means that you could make very reloadable, very sustainable, shit hit the fan without rule of law style 20 gauge shotgun shells. And yes, if you wanted to put it in 12 gauge, you'd have to wrap, let's say, the first 2 inches with tape. And all of a sudden you would have almost exactly the same thing as a flare cartridge for a 12 gauge. But it wouldn't fire a flare. Its inner diameter is 62 caliber. And our flares are 0.75, or 0.57, excuse me. So I looked for another piece of tubing that's close to that. Now, if you're not aware of it, that's pretty close to the 0.569 inner diameter of annealed half-inch copper tubing if it's copper tube type M. And the outer diameter is 0.625, which in this case would jam fit inside of a piece of EMT tubing after you put in your plugs and everything, and make it to where you could use that not just as a 20 gauge shell and not just as some weird underbore extra long 12 gauge shell with a right sized rim, but you could also use this deliberately to make a flare cartridge by just doing the following, and I'll give you the list. You'd need a 0.06 or 0.05 or a little under 1.5 millimeter thick washer. The inner diameter for the hole needs to be around 5.84 millimeter or 0.23 for a starting point. The outer diameter really should be about 0.87, but the closest I could find is 0.98 or 25 millimeter outer diameter. This washer, steel or other metal, could be trimmed down to be 0.887 or 0.89 or 0.87 and work just fine for a rim. This would have 3 holes drilled in it and a countersink done for very small screws that would go into a metal plug, probably a copper plug, that would be 0.24 inches or thicker and have a hole drilled in it that's almost exactly 0.24 inches for a shotgun primer to go in. And then that would be slipped into a piece of half-inch or 16 millimeter EMT tubing, which has an inner diameter that's 0.622 ID. After that's put in, you could put in 3 holes or 4 around the rim, around the base of, and put in countersunk screws to fit it in. This will fit directly into a 12 gauge, but reinforcing the sides by wrapping it with a thin layer of duct tape, since it's 2 inches long, would then make it into a very good simulation of a standard flare cartridge used in the United States and would fit into every shotgun you have and be very reloadable as a cartridge if you want, a 20 gauge or 12 gauge, or if you put in a inner slave of half-inch copper tubing type M, would then become capable of being used to fire flares. This would still require a lot of work, and you'd probably have to get lucky getting the copper tubing to fit to where you could get away with this, but this is a starting point. Again, this is a video not about building all-steel, extremely durable, and extremely reliable shotgun shells, as that is not really the point of the video. This is about the starting points for being able to make, if you want to, a flare cartridge. And again, if you want to really do this right, since this is a combination from the projectile and the little launcher add-on adapter thing, since this is available, you can just get the little butt end here that fits onto it that turns into a 12 gauge or some other types, and just use that directly. And I recommend that strongly. And again, you could also just start off with copper tubing and make your own flare launchers. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.